Hi, welcome to our webinar. My name is Jessica Justinesen, and I will be today's host. Thank you all for joining. Today, we will be exploring the new frontier of remote behavioral research with sensor and AI-powered technologies. This is a slide about what we'll learn about today. Today, we're going to understand the functionalities and value of sensor and AI-powered technologies. We will talk about online research tools like webcam eye tracking and respiration, as well as AI-powered facial coding and voice analysis. We'll also talk about effective methods for collecting, processing, and analyzing remote data, and with a focus on measurable outcomes and actionable insights. For the third part of the webinar, we'll be talking about iMotions' remote data collection platform and how it streamlines research across diverse use cases, setting a new standard in online behavioral research. Today's webinar is hosted by iMotions. At iMotions, we provide human insight software powering research across a variety of industries, ranging from academic and human factors research to consumer insights. We have clients all over the world conducting research in communications, automotive, safety, psychology, education, usability, tourism, marketing, ergonomics, healthcare, product design, beauty, wellness, food science, and sensory research. These include research done remotely as well as in lab environments, virtual reality environments, and even studies conducted in the wild, as they say. How do we do that? iMotions has a unique multimodal platform for integrating multi-sensor research. If you have attended one of our webinars before, you might notice that this graphic is a bit different from what you're used to seeing. In yellow, you can see all the modalities we offer for our in-lab software products. These will not be the focus of this webinar, but if you are interested in learning about these in-lab solutions, you're always welcome to get in touch with us. Today's webinar will focus on the modalities in blue. So whether it's an in-lab or remote solution, iMotions synchronizes data streams from multiple hardware sources, allowing researchers to gain new and deeper insights into people's experiences and reactions. For those of you that are perhaps new to biosignals like eye tracking or facial coding, here are some of the benefits of leveraging these technologies, whether it's in the lab or remote research. So we're going to talk about sort of quantitative data that you can measure, analyze, and repeat the experiment, that these are objective metrics that can avoid the biases you have with self-reporting metrics like surveys or questionnaires, that you can have real-time data, which opens up for completely different insights into your research, and that we also look at non-conscious metrics so that you can look into the why behind some of the self-reporting results. Today, we have with us Jessica and Francesca. They're presenting on behalf of iMotions. Both of these women started iMotions as experienced researchers. Jessica has been at iMotions for 8 years and is the director of our product specialist team. This team focuses on supporting customers in research design, answering technical questions, leading scientific credibility initiatives, as well as validating our newest developments, such as web camera-based eye tracking and web camera-based respiration, which we will discuss today. Francesca has been at iMotions for about 6 years and as our Director of Corporate Solutions and Strategy in North America. Francesca works with helping people find solutions that suit their research goals, including those focused on consumer insights. She will be sharing how remote behavioral research use cases with us today. So kind of a quick overview of this presentation. We're going to talk about what is remote behavioral research, how it works, some project examples and use cases, and remote behavioral research, how that works within iMotions. Feel free to share your thoughts and questions with us in the comment section. There will be a Q&A at the end of this presentation. Also, just letting you know, this webinar is being recorded, so that if you need to jump off early, you will get a link for this later. All right, and I will turn it over to Jessica.
Thanks, Jessica. So I'm delighted for the first part of this webinar to talk a little bit about remote behavioral research in general, why it's important and why it's of value to you, especially today. So let's talk a little bit about remote research just in general, removing the behavioral bit. But if we think about remote research, it's really valuable in methods today because respondents can participate basically from where they are. Usually these typically focus on self-report, so surveys and questionnaires, where you would send these surveys to participants and they can collect that data from wherever they are. And typically these can be coordinated through panel providers. So surveys have been around a long time, same with remote research. And these have usually been streamlined into some really simple offerings that you can then send out to your participants. Now, the advantages of remote research are myriad. primarily that they're fast. So you don't have to think about scheduling people in a lab or bringing people into a space. It's really quick. It's really easy to collect a lot of people within a relatively short period of time. In that respect, it's also really scalable. And because we're doing this remotely, typically over panel providers or web-based services, they're also pretty cost effective as well. Now, the downside of remote research is the same downside that you get with typical self-report methods in general, that you're dealing with subjective biases, filters, all of those little things that can sort of affect self-report responses in general. And because you're collecting people remotely, any idea of specialized hardware typically can't be used, just logistically speaking, but also, the risk of sending hardware to people's homes, essentially. Now, if we look at behavioral research in general, so removing the remote component, but thinking about in lab as well, behavioral research is typically performed in lab with specialized hardware that can measure various aspects of consumer physiology or behavior. So things like eye tracking, webcams for facial expression analysis, skin conductance, EEG, and many others. This can also include self-report metrics, including surveys. And we often say in iMotions, we don't want to replace conventional self-report measures, but we want to augment those with the physiological and behavioral data that you can get in that moment. Now, the advantages of behavioral research is that you typically run these in a highly controlled environment. You're physically bringing people into a lab space where the lighting is going to be consistent, people's placement in front of the computers and machines is going to be consistent. So all of your conditions are kept specifically controlled. Now, the disadvantages of this are, of course, cost, not just for physically bringing people into a space, but also for the logistics and the hardware that you would have to invest in, as well as lab constraints in that regard. But when you take these two things, remote research and all of its advantages, and behavioral research and all of its advantages, you put those together, what you get is the convenience of online research with the powerful insights that come with a behavioral lab. So with remote behavioral research, you can still collect data from respondents remotely, from wherever they are in the country or even the world. You can still administer surveys. We don't ever want to replace those. And the workflow is the same as typical remote research. But in this case, we're adding that physiological sensor component to that. In this case, leveraging the participant's webcam and microphone in order to capture behavioral insights. Again, leveraging those behavioral tools in order to augment what you typically get with self-report measures. So how does remote behavioral research work? Let's go through each of the different sensors and modules that we typically work with. And now a little bit of a note on terminology. When we talk about sensors, typically we're talking about hardware. And the really powerful thing about remote surveys and hardware is that you're really dealing with two pieces, just the webcam, and this can be a simple USB webcam or an internal webcam on a laptop, for example, as well as a microphone. So in terms of hardware requirements, those are actually pretty simple. But the different kinds of data and insights you can get from those tools can be quite varied. And at iMotions, we tend to call these kind of groups of metrics modules. So for the webcam, we actually have several modules that we can get from that camera feed. Webcam eye tracking is one, facial expression analysis, and webcam respiration. So we'll talk about each of these in future slides. And then the microphone can also provide us voice analysis. And when you take all of these different modalities together, that's where we really get the advantages of multimodal behavioral research, which is what iMotions is all about. So let's go through each of these modalities and the specific value that they provide. So eye tracking is definitely one of the most common and popular sensors that we work with. And that's because the idea of visual attention is highly appealing to researchers in different verticals. In this case, we are using the webcam feed to determine how the head and the eyes move as people are looking on the screen. So we're detecting the head and the eyes and looking where the eyes are oriented, and we can measure where people are looking and also what aspects of the screen are getting ignored. So from that, we can derive some important metrics like gaze replays, gaze paths, heat maps, areas of interest, individual and aggregate data. For those who are used to eye tracking data, these are all familiar terms. And eye tracking is really popular in a wide variety of different use cases. So this can include usability and UX, advertising, package testing, simulation, cognitive science, human factors, and many more. Now, the second tool is facial expression analysis, which is not as common as eye tracking, but definitely one that garners the most interest. In this case, we're using the webcam to record a person's face. And in this case, there are specialized algorithms, typically deep learning or neural nets, that will take that webcam feed, detect the face, and quantify what facial expressions are being made in that moment. There are a number of different metrics that you can garner from this tool depending on the level of detail you want to get into. For example, we have 20 what are called facial units, where they're typically sort of individual movements of the face that are one or two muscles, like brow furrow, smile, cheek raise, etc. And then there are also higher level metrics like engagement, joy, sentimentality, and confusion. We also have voice analysis, which is another method of measuring emotional expression. In this case, sound captured through the microphone is processed, and AI extracts information from the tone of the voice. This can range from fundamental prosodic features like pitch and loudness to emotional dimensions like valence, dominance, which is the amount of control or confidence you have in the voice, or activation, which is essentially an arousal metric. So voice is especially powerful because it can give you a sense of expression, but also intensity or arousal. And then finally, we have respiration, which is the newest tool that we have in our toolbox. And this is especially exciting because, again, we're using computer vision to take a video feed of an individual and looking at the minute changes in the movements of the torso as the person breathes. We are able to plot that respiration rate over time. And as we know, our respiration rate changes with varying levels of arousal and valence. So we can derive metrics like respiration rate, which is breaths per minute, respiration cycle count, so the number of times you breathe within a minute, and the duration of that cycle. And that has very popular uses in healthcare, simulation, and other relaxation measurements, but is especially powerful because it gives you that arousal dimension, while facial expressions gives you a sense of valence. So now that we understand a little bit about the toolbox and the tools that are available to you, let's learn a little bit about how these tools can be applied in tandem and in combination to derive usable insights. And with that, I will turn it over to Francesca.
Hold on, let's just get Francesca back on the line. Francesca, can you hear us?
I can hear you. Can you?
Okay, great.
Oh, it broke a second. Yeah, I was just thanking Jessica for the great presentations, and I'm really excited to walk you through some practical applications and really show how many organizations are using remote behavioral research to bring greater clarity, precision, and depth into their applications. As we presented throughout the webinar, at the heart of our approach is really the value of multimodal research. So the integration of various behavioral data from eye tracking, facial expression analysis, voice analysis, and even respiration monitoring to gather a holistic understanding of human behavior. These technologies are real game changers when it comes to understanding real human behavior in the moment. And they are applied across various use cases, including A/B testing. Think about packaging studies, flyer or social media testing. They're also used to evaluate digital media, creative testing. Think about advertisement testing or movie trailer studies. And they're also used in improving qualitative methodologies through verbal feedback studies, as well as talk aloud sessions, for example. But let's take a look into an example of an A/B testing for a packaging study. When we think about a retail environment, visual attention is everything. We support many organizations in leveraging eye tracking technologies to really understand what catches the participants, the consumer's eyes, and what gets completely overlooked, whether they are testing a new package design, a product placement, or even a shelf layout. To give you some ideas, sustainability or health-related claims are becoming more and more present on packages, but do participants notice them at all? People are also becoming more aware of labels, informations, nutrition facts, but what are the ingredients or informations that may influence the consumer purchase intent? Or how is the new package design performing on the shelf? These are all questions that remote behavioral research can help you answer with quantifiable data. Designing a remote A/B testing is honestly quite simple. Pictures of the content that we'd like to test. Think about different packages, different flyers or social media posts can be uploaded to the platform. The study can then be distributed via browser interface, via a unique link that can be shared via email or panel providers. And data from the participant's webcam is then used to collect eye tracking data. So if we analyze metrics such as heat time or time to first fixation, what do participants notice first? Dwell time or total time spent on specific elements of interest on the packages. Or even if we look at gaze patterns and how participants navigate the package or the planogram, we can get additional insights on visual attention. And this can be easily correlated with traditional methodologies. Think about brand recall surveys or purchase intent questionnaires. Let's take a simple A/B testing of a package redesign as an example, a Jack Daniel's whiskey bottle. The current bottle on the left side has a bigger logo and a smaller label, while the new package design on the right side has a smaller logo and a bigger label. With the eye tracking, webcam-based eye tracking, we can really add new insights, and the deliverables that we can gather are multiple. Think about which package design catches attention faster, or which package design do people look at longer. So if we focus on the main attention metrics, heat time, as we mentioned earlier, time to first notice, or what do participants notice first, and total time spent on the element of interest, what do participants attend most? We noticed that actually the bottle redesign performed overall better when compared to the current design, with both the logo and the label being noticed faster and attended for a longer time. Additionally, if we'd like to translate the single package design into how it would perform on a shelf through a planogram testing study, for example, we can also evaluate not only how the redesign performs against the old packaging, the current packaging, but also against their competitors. We also support and work with many organizations that focus their applications on media testing. Think about advertisement studies. If we think about traditional metrics like liking scales, dials, they really only scratch the surface. With remote biometric behavioral research, we can really go deeper, and we can leverage webcam-based, data-driven insights to really improve digital creative, such as commercials, movie trailers, even emotional storytelling. We can compare different versions and evaluate which is the most effective one to drive participants' engagement and attention. We can also use these methodologies to address brand recognition and recall, to evaluate, for example, the effectiveness of logo positioning placement and how it might correlate with the consumer's purchase intent. Even in this case, running a study is quite simple. It simply requires the upload of the video content that we'd like to test on the platform, and the study can then be deployed via browser interface to our participant. In the previous studies, in the A/B testing example, we were working primarily with static images. So we prioritize, let's say in that case, visual attention and eye tracking metrics. In this case, since we're working with a more dynamic content, potentially more engaging content, we can actually leverage the same webcam, not only to understand what drove participant attention, but also to detect moments of expressed emotions and arousal. And more specifically, we could use eye tracking to see what participant focused their attention the most. For example, is the brand being noticed? Is the call to action being seen? We can use the same webcam to assess facial expression analysis to look at expressed emotion. For example, has the joke landed, has the humor landed, or is the surprise moment actually a waha moment for the participant? And last but not least, respiration metrics. We can detect moments of increased arousal or interest, offering that physiological window into the consumer's engagement with the digital media. Let's take an example of an advertisement comparison study. In this case, we compared two advertisements of a Danish company for the same product. We're not going to share and show the entire videos just in the interest of time, but just for context, the company always designed the commercial to be highly humorized. So for this study, we really wanted to capture the immediate emotional reactions of the viewers. And for this purpose, we used webcam-based eye tracking to address what elements drove most attention, in particular, elements like the logo, the product. And we also used the webcam-based facial expression analysis to look at expressed emotions, and in particular, positive balance, engagement, and expressed joy. Let's look at the webcam-based eye tracking data first. An interesting approach that we support would be to segment the video, for example, to look at specific thumbnails. For example, in this case, we have isolated the final frame, the call to action shot. We notice how the final frame is very similar between the two ads, showing the product in its packaging on the top, the product on the bread ready to be eaten, and on the bottom right, the logo. And they are placed in a very similar arrangement. Looking at eye tracking qualitative data, the heat maps, these thermal maps from green to red, we noticed that participants navigated the final shot, the image, in a very similar manner, focusing mostly on the product in its packaging, the redder heat maps, a little less on the product, on the bread, and definitely less on the logo. However, while this is extremely intuitive to understand, we can really drive a conclusive insight on which ad performed better. But we can look at quantifiable data. So if we look at the bar graph on the right, we notice that the logo and the bread have performed quite similarly between the two ads. However, we notice how the product is attended for a significant longer time in advertisement 1 when compared to ad 2. And if we're interested in going a layer deeper, we can also address not only how the advertisements perform in their final frame, but also how they perform throughout their entire duration. We can leverage the same segmentation tool to divide the video in time segments of interest. For example, the first, the mid, and the last 10 seconds for a 30 seconds ad, and analyze how different elements have performed throughout the entire duration of the commercials. As we notice from the bar graph on the right side, the protagonist's face drove the most attention, which is to be expected. The logo performed quite similarly throughout both ads. However, the notice seemed to be noticed more frequently in advertisement 2 when compared to ad 1. So, if we have to gather some insight from it, while the product was attended longer during the call to action shot, the final frame that we saw earlier for advertisement 1, it was actually attended throughout the entire duration of the commercial for advertisement 2, which actually may influence brand recall and purchase intent. But as researchers in the field, we know that part of understanding recall, purchase intent, is also about understanding what triggered those emotions and what really captured participants' engagement. For this purpose, we correlated eye tracking metrics with facial expression analysis metrics to address the expressed emotions. we notice how both ads elicited comparable level of expressiveness, also referred here as engagement, as well as positive balance, so positive experience throughout the duration of both advertisements. However, we notice that advertisement 1 showed joy level for longer period of times throughout the duration of the commercial, which provides us insight regarding its potential better alignment with the creative intent, being humorous. And this said, we don't really have insight into the intensity of these emotions, so the joy levels. So for this reason, we can actually deepen our insights by adding respiration metrics to detect moments of increased arousal and interest. Looking at the sample data on the right, we can observe the respiration cycle, and at the bottom, in red, the moment-to-moment respiration rates. Generally speaking, and as Jessica was presenting earlier, as content becomes more engaging and emotionally charged, respiration rates tend to rise. So going back to our study, our advertisement comparison, we can see the value of correlating respiration-based metrics with facial expression analysis metrics. We found, for example, that participants have showed joy for longer time periods during advertisement 1, but we don't really get a sense of the intensity of this emotion. And this is really something that respiration metrics can provide us insight into. As I was mentioning at the beginning, we can also leverage remote behavioral research to enhance traditional methodologies with data-driven insights, such as verbal feedback studies. Think about online journaling or think aloud sessions. These are ideal opportunities to integrate remote behavioral research and biometric technologies in various applications, including product evaluation, user experience testing, consumer journey, or e-commerce studies. We can leverage webcam-based data to look, for example, at moment of confusion when we were open for clarity during a web usability study, for example. Or we can address how long participants took to complete a specific task, such as purchase a defined product. Setting up a web-based UX testing is as simple as we have presented earlier. It's all about copying the URL of the website we'd like to test into the platform and deploy the study to our participant via browser interface. In this case, its visual attention is again critical, so we can leverage webcam-based eye tracking to address what element on the web page gets noticed, and also gaze patterns to evaluate how participants actually navigated the page. We can also leverage facial expression analysis to look at expressed emotions, for example, as we mentioned earlier, confusion or moment of negative valence, to look at moment of frustration while navigating or searching for a specific product on a website. Additionally, different tasks can be associated with talk aloud sessions, where participants are instructed to vocalize their experience. And we can leverage voice analysis and transcriptions tool to add additional insights. In this example of a web usability study, we are comparing two different landing pages, page A versus page B. We are interested in evaluating participants' attention to the different sections of the landing pages, as well as their emotional experience while navigating the website. The participants were also instructed to vocalize their experience in a talk aloud session, which was guided by written questions. As we look, or as we gather from the data, looking at the top left, our voice analysis data show that participants expressed an overall preference for page A, as evidenced by the higher joy level of the tones of their voice data. And we see how these metrics align well with the lower negative expressed emotions of the facial expression analysis data, the graph in the middle. In particular, let's look at brow furrow, smaller amount of time of browser showed for page A when compared to page B. Eye tracking data were also used to identify elements of the landing pages that capture participant attention. Additionally, to further deepen our understanding, we can leverage respiration data to look at moment of increased arousal that could be potentially correlated with the moment of positive experience while navigating the landing pages. This data can also be augmented with behavioral data, such as time to task completion, for example, leveraging segmentation tools such as annotations or marker. Now that we know how remote behavioral research can be used for various applications, let's see how we can implement it in iMotions. I'll pass it over to you, Jessica.
Awesome. Thank you, Francesca, for that really in-depth overview of the different kinds of applications. I think it's really exciting that all of these different study types are things that can be easily implemented within the iMotions platform. So let's go a little bit through each of the different functionalities that can allow that. Now, for those unfamiliar with iMotions, iMotions is a software platform that can allow you to integrate and synchronize these different types of inputs. And we covered 4 that are available remotely. So the webcam-based eye tracking, facial expression analysis, voice analysis, and respiration. All of those sensors can be brought into the software and synchronized together, which allow you to get a really holistic view of how someone is reacting to something in the moment. And you can really examine that from these different dimensions that we talked about. So visual attention from the eye tracking, emotion through the facial expressions and voice analysis, and arousal through voice as well as respiration. There's a lot of built-in features within the platform. It's really kind of an end-to-end platform that covers every aspect of the study collection and research process. So everything from designing your study, uploading your stimuli, adding in surveys, screen recordings, and many more. The functionality is really wide, so there's a lot of versatility in the kinds of studies that you can run. And the big advantage that really endears this to remote data collection is the ease of the setup. Although you're building the study within iMotions and analyzing the data within iMotions, from the point of view of the participant, it's really easy. They just need a webcam and a microphone from whatever computer that they're using from wherever they are. I want to talk a little bit about the study builder. So like I mentioned before, the platform really allows you to build out the entire flow of your study. And we're really excited that we have this really powerful and versatile study builder that we updated within the last year. What this allows you to do is really build out your study according to your specifications and your needs. A lot of remote platforms available on the market are very restrictive in the kinds of studies that you can run. Some of them are you can only do an A/B test, or you can only do a package test, or you can only do a video test. Some don't even allow website testing in there. Whereas with the iMotion Study Builder, you can really build out the kind of study that you want and have control over every variable within that process. The builder is really easy and intuitive to use. You can add in images, videos, websites, and surveys, and it allows for block designs, randomization, multiple flows, everything that you need for a good and balanced study. Now, I had mentioned previously that we don't want to replace conventional methods like survey and self-report. So to that end, we also have many powerful survey options within the tool as well. We have our own kind of simple survey tool that gives you a blank slide where you can put in things like instructions or images, for example. But then we also have our new advanced survey tool, which gives you something kind of akin to a Google form. You can put in blocks of questions and even have basic things like skip logic. So how you answer question A will dictate the kinds of questions that will appear subsequently. You can have required questions, different kinds of styling options if you needed to white label part of your experience, etc. And then we also have some integrations in there. For example, we still work really strongly with Qualtrics, and I can mention that later on. But the real strength of the platform is in our data collection, analysis, and export tools. And because we have this flow where you design your study in iMotions, deploy it remotely, and then analyze the data within the iMotions platform, what you get is the full suite of analysis tools that are available on a research level for those that typically would use these in lab. So everything from our visualizations to heat maps, gaze mapping, and in other visualizations, we have all of our segmentation tools like markup, markers and annotations, which you can use to slice and dice your data and have even more granular analyses in there. You have the full suite of our R notebooks. So everything that we do for signal processing and the summarizing of data into metrics that you can easily use. All of that suite is available, as well as our areas of interest and our eye tracking analysis tools. And finally, all of the data can still be exportable in CSV format. You can either get the raw data or the summarized data that come as the result of our R notebook tools, as well as our visualizations. So I think this really distinguishes us from other platforms that do remote data collection in the field, and that their use cases are very restrictive, and often the kinds of analyses that you can do are also really restrictive. But in this case, you really get the full benefit of the accessibility of remote research with the entire repertoire of analysis tools that are available to you in iMotions Lab. So speaking of iMotions Lab, I do want to draw a quick comparison between what you can do with an in-lab setup. So when you have a physical iMotion station with hardware that you're bringing people into versus if you do use the remote data collection platform or RDC. So there is a lot of overlap, and what you can typically get with lab can usually have its own analog remotely. So things like facial expression analysis, eye tracking, voice analysis, and respiration, those have their analogs between the remote versions of those tools that typically involve the webcam feed and the hardware equivalents that you would get in lab. The analysis tools are also the same. So AOI metrics, advanced analysis, access to the R notebooks, access to surveys, those are consistent between the two. The only thing that lab can do better or more as opposed to remote data collection is first off the ability to bring in other modalities that require specialized hardware. So if you really want to look at EEG, for example, or heart rate, it's really difficult or to do those remotely, or solutions for those don't yet exist on the market in a way that makes sense. So if you really are interested in bringing in extra modalities beyond what we covered in the remote platform, then you probably want to think about an in-lab setup. Another strength of the in-lab setup is our API, so our ability to connect with other non-native hardware or software, being able to stream in or out time series data as well as markers. I often get asked, well, should I do my study in lab or should I do it in remote data collection then? And it doesn't have to be an either or. Often what I recommend is a little bit of both, because each provides their own strengths and weaknesses. For example, if you have a study, I would recommend doing it first in lab with hardware and in a controlled scenario in order to get some base data on what a small group might be doing. And then if you get some interesting results, let's try to extrapolate that to a remote scenario and send this study out to a wider demographic, leveraging those remote tools to get a much larger sample size. If you can get kind of consistent results in both, you can be fairly confident that your result is actually what you're looking at. So a lot of the time, it's never either or. There are strengths to both, and together can be really, really powerful in a research program. What's especially powerful too is that our remote data collection platform can work with other third-party survey and panel providers. I know those that already rely heavily on remote data collection methods, especially for surveys, often have their own workflows for recruitment. And these often involve panel providers that can provide specific kinds of segments or demographics if you want to be really, really particular as to who you include in your study. So we've had workarounds for integrating remote data collection within flows for Qualtrics, Prolific, Amazon MTurk, for example. So you can use those platforms to do your initial screening and recruitment, redirect them to an iMotion study where they can do the eye tracking, respiration, voice, and facial expressions, and then at the end, redirect them back to your panel provider to log them as a complete or give them compensation, etc. For those that work in academia and rely heavily on Sona systems for recruiting students for studies, we also integrate with Sona as well. So you can recruit studies through Sona, have them do an iMotion study, and then get redirected back to Sona for issuing of course credit, etc. So you can keep your current workflows, and we work really nicely to integrate RDC into those platforms and also pass through relevant information like participant IDs, for example, to ensure a seamless experience. And then what's really powerful about our multimodal suite are the caliber of the partnerships that we have. So for facial expressions, we work with Affectiva, which is one of the largest and most established, has the world's largest proprietary emotion data repository. And their Aftex engine is really well validated, has high accuracy, and there's white papers available that talk to its accuracy and the training data that it uses. So that is really well established. And they also base their metrics off of the FACS system. So the facial action coding system, which is used a lot in academic circles. So it's very true to sort of that academic gold standard. We also partner heavily with Audeering for our voice analysis tool. And Audeering is the commercial arm behind OpenSmile, which also has a very strong pedigree in the literature, really strong publication record, and has been validated for multiple use cases. So we really aim to find partners that are well known in academic circles, have a good publication record, and we partner with them to bring the best of that technology to you. Our respiration and webcam eye tracking algorithms are homegrown within iMotions. I'm really proud to say that we're on the third iteration of our webcam eye tracking platform, and I think it's one of the best in the market in terms of accuracy. We have white papers and validation studies available for each, and we've taken the care to bring that technology also to academic conferences to have that vetted by the research community. So the key takeaways that we hope that you've gotten from the last 40 minutes or so are the real power and value of combining remote research methods with behavioral research tools. It really merges the convenience of online research and using surveys and self-report remotely with the insights and the powerful physiological data that you can get from in-lab research and in-lab tools. And it can be used to add these additional dimensions of behavior, so visual attention, emotion, and arousal insights to your research on top of your surveys. And it has a very similar workflow that people are comfortable with, just adding a webcam and microphones that respondents already have. So it really lowers the barrier to entry for participants being able to give you good, usable data that can supplement your already powerful research program. So we hope that we've piqued some of your interest and clued you into the power and utility of these remote tools. And with that, I think we will open it up to questions.
All right. Thank you, Jessica and Francesca. Before we get started with the Q&A, I'm going to launch a little poll. If you'd like to get more information about RDC or other iMotions products and services, just let us know. So you should see that really quick. Sorry, mine popped up. And I'll start asking some of the questions that we've gotten from the audience. Let's start with, there's a lot of questions here about calibration. Can you tell us a little bit about calibration with RDC?
Yes. So I think with webcam eye tracking, let's be honest, webcam eye tracking is not the same as using an infrared tracker in a lab. So infrared trackers are really robust, really accurate. And with webcam eye tracking, we're using computer vision, which frankly is going to be a different beast. And that's not our algorithm versus others. It's just the nature of things. So things like calibration become especially important in webcam eye tracking. We do automatically add calibration to our study flows. It's a 16-point calibration, I believe, and it adds about 40 seconds to your study flow. We usually recommend having a block of calibration at the beginning and at the end of your study to maximize accuracy. If your study is especially long, you do have the option of adding multiple calibration blocks in between. And the more information you give the algorithm with regards to calibration, the better it will be.
Great, thank you. I have a few questions here that are related to studies that have to do with groups, whether that's sort of a video platform like Zoom here, or whether or not it's in-depth interviews in groups not in response to a stimulus. Can you talk about that in relation to RDC studies?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of different options, and it boils down to what specific metrics are you interested in, because that's also going to dictate some of the technical limitations. The problem with doing Zoom and webcam and sort of the remote data collection platform at the same time is that often there are conflicts with the hardware. So especially if you're using the Zoom executable with a browser using RDC, they tend to fight over the camera. So the camera can either be with one or the other. Now, anecdotally, what we found is that if applications are both browser-based, so you have Zoom browser plus RDC, there tends to be a lesser likelihood of that conflict happening. So it is theoretically possible, and then RDC will just record whatever is on the screen. But you also have to be mindful of the specific metrics that you're interested in, because if you're looking for things like eye tracking or voice analysis, actually not voice analysis, respiration. So if you're looking at webcam-based eye tracking and respiration, often the act of talking can also affect the accuracy of those two measures. So if those two tend to be pretty important to you, then we'll have to rethink your study design a little bit. If you're just interested in facial expressions and voice analysis, yeah, we could do it through remote data collection. There is also the possibility of just recording the Zoom video and then post-importing that into the iMotions platform for analysis after the fact. And that might actually be an easier approach, just so you're not beholden to collecting everything live. It does make things a little bit easier. So I think it's going to depend a little bit on your physical setup and also the specific metrics that you're interested in.
Great, thank you. We also have a couple questions about sort of the burden on participants. So is there a specific laptop they have to have? Are there any specs for the microphone and the webcam? Do they have to have iMotions? Things kind of along this line of what it takes from the participants in order to be in the study.
Yes. So the laptop or computer used, it can be any computer, desktop like PC or Mac, it doesn't matter. I know there have been some questions about mobile collections. We are currently investigating the possibility of tablet collections, but that's not a reality yet, but we are looking into it. So for the time being, let's say PC or Mac, laptop or desktop is okay. The typical cameras and microphones that come with those equipment tend to be enough for minimum spec. So you'll still get good quality data with those. The participant does not need to have iMotions, they just need to have a browser. So in terms of the tech setup, the barrier is quite low for participants, and you just have to make sure they have a good internet connection, etc. I would say the biggest consideration on the participant side is giving them good instructions, to be honest. I think participant compliance is the biggest factor in assuring good versus bad quality data. So actually educating them on, hey, we're going to be recording your face. You'd be surprised the number of people that get a consent form, say they read through it, and then realize they're going to be recorded and they bail partway through the study. Or explaining, hey, we're going to be calibrating. This is what's going to happen, right? So I think participant instruction goes a long way too in assuring good data collection.
All right. Another question we have is about can iMotions RDC be integrated with other survey data collection platforms? The examples listed are Qualtrics and SurveyMonkey.
Yes. So Qualtrics, we already have an integration in the software. So you just create your survey in Qualtrics as per usual, take the URL for that survey and just pop that into iMotions, and it's its own stimulus type. So we can record the participant while they go through a Qualtrics survey. For SurveyMonkey, it's a little bit different. You could essentially do a website stimulus, and then have it direct to a SurveyMonkey questionnaire. It's just not as tight of an integration as we have with Qualtrics, and we have to consider how we're passing information from one platform to the next. So how you can basically assure that someone's responses in SurveyMonkey, that you're able to correspond that to their data in iMotions, essentially.
All right. We also have a few questions that are kind of more about the technicalities, and I'm going to sort of break this into two questions. One is looking at, do academic journals recognize these remote tools in data collection? And another kind of on the same is talking about sort of the reliability and validity of some of these especially webcam tools. About people are asking about eye trackers and about respiration specifically, and also any resources iMotions might have on that.
Yeah, absolutely. Also, I'm sorry, Francesca. I feel like I'm hogging all the questions. I'll try to throw some over to you.
No worries. You're good.
So yeah, so I think we're definitely seeing a paradigm shift in terms of the attitudes people have towards remote tools. Personally, from the point of view of iMotions, we've shied away from it for a really long time because we knew that webcam eye tracking was just not going to be as accurate as in-lab methods. And for that reason, we're like, well, it's not good enough for us, so we're just not going to tackle it. But then what happened was the pandemic, and no one could go into a lab. So the demand for remote tools really grew after that. So we kind of pivoted more into that arena. I did mention that sort of we're on the third iteration of our webcam eye tracking algorithm, and anything that we develop in-house, we do extensive validation on compared to screen-based eye trackers as a gold standard. And we also present the technology at academic conferences. So we have presented our webcam eye tracking algorithm at eye tracking conferences, presenting to eye tracking researchers to get their opinions on the validation and the accuracy of the data. And we've taken their feedback into account as we've been developing it. So that's why I have very high confidence in the accuracy and validity of what we have now and sort of the state of the field as it is. Respiration's a bit of a different beast. I feel like that one is very new because for a long time, respiration could only be done through a pressure band, similar to what BioPack offers, and that's kind of the gold standard. But at the same time, when it came to remote collections, we needed to address, how do we measure arousal? And we can't do things like GSR, like there's no way to collect that remotely. So respiration kind of became a good candidate for how we can look at that. So we developed, a respiration algorithm that can help address that arousal problem. And again, we've done our own validation, comparing it to a gold standard respiration belt from BioPack. We find that they correlate very highly, which is good. And then we've also validated it on a use case basis. So looking at heavily valenced and intense videos and looking how respiration rate changes with that. So I think respiration is a shinier, newer addition to the remote toolbox, but I also see that once it catches on, I feel like there's a lot of potential for its utility. And then webcam eye tracking, we've spent a lot of time validating that. All of the white papers that I've talked about in the validation studies are available on our website. So if you do need something citable, we do have you covered there.
Great, thank you. I'm scrolling through these questions and trying to summarize and lump them together a little bit. So we've talked about accuracy and we've talked about sort of validity of these technologies. On the next slide, I'll also, when we're wrapping up sort of the Q&A, I'll share a slide on where you can find resources because some of these questions are very technical and I'll point you towards where you can find some of these technical ones. There are a few participants that are asking about using this for mobile or if there's sort of like a phone adaptation for this. Anything about that?
Yeah. So I mentioned briefly that we are investigating the possibility of tablet testing, and phone would be a natural extension of that. Again, it's one of those cases where we shied away from it for a long time because if we were to make an offering because people asked for it, that it would not match the standard that we would want to have for a tool of this kind. There's a couple of technical considerations you have to think about, namely the accuracy of your webcam eye tracking compared to the size of the phone that you're working with. If the data is not that granular, well, like what's the granularity of the data you're going to get on a screen that's small, right? So just the quality of the data is not going to be nearly as good. And that's why we've taken our time a little bit more with that. That being said, we understand the utility of that and we are trying to explore ways in which we can make that work.
Great. There's also a lot of questions about pricing. Where can people find pricing information?
That one I can throw to Francesca.
So yes, well, we do have some sample packages available on our website that you can definitely, look into. But as we always suggest, please reach out to us because iMotions is such a flexible solutions that offers so many different setups that could be ideal for your specific use cases. So having the possibility of discussing directly with one of our solution consultants, our product specialist team, I always suggest being the ideal considerations to make before actually developing a package and a setup that is ideal for your research needs.
Great. Let's look here, see if we can find some more questions. We've got some of these pricing ones are up. Can you tell us a little bit about respiration and emotion and whether or not that's sort of a valid approach to examining emotion? I think there are a few questions on that.
Yeah. So again, the thing with respiration is that, if you want to look at things like arousal, there are other hardware that frankly do a better job and are easier of it, like skin conductance. The only problem is that we can't turn that into a remote analog, which is why we sort of centered on respiration for that. Now, if you look at the literature, there is evidence, like if we look at these two dimensions of valence and arousal, there is evidence that respiration does change in response to changes in valence and arousal. So as you saw in Francesca's example, when you experience videos that are of very high arousal or high intensity, that our breathing rate increases. And you see that with an increase in the cycle count and a duration, a lowering of the cycle duration. So we can see those changes in response to changes in arousal. We also see changes in valence. So highly negative stimuli can also affect respiration. Same with highly positive stimuli. If you're laughing, for example, that can also show up in the respiration data. So there are changes that occur. But I think what's going to be really interesting is how we can sort of tease out these dimensions a little bit more, because it is not as conventional a sensor as skin conductance, for example. But I think there's a lot of potential for its utility, especially now that we can collect it remotely. So yeah, I think the literature has some really interesting things to show. And I think for those that are enterprising and want to seize those opportunities, I think there's a lot of opportunity to flesh out how powerful respiration can be in this regard.
All right, we're running tight on time. I think I'm going to take this last question because it's also been asked a few times. Can you say something about sort of, this is online behavioral research. We're talking about videos, we're talking about faces, we're talking about voices in an online space. Can you say something about storing this kind of information on cloud? What about GDPR? And speak sort of to that concern.
Yes. So being a European company, we do take GDPR very seriously. We do have a data processor agreement that all of our clients have access to, which goes over how we handle our data. In short, our data is kept on Amazon Web Servers, which are, for our European clients, fully GDPR compliant. So we have documentation available on that. And for our US, many of the same kind of guidelines apply to our American clients as well. So we do have that documentation available. Yeah, we can easily provide that on request.
All right. Thank you so much, Francesca and Jessica. I'm going to just close up with this slide. If you're looking for more information about RDC, feel free to visit our website. From there, you can request a live demo. A lot of questions that were asked were very specific. People want to see how this works. They want to know about data visualization. They want to know about markers. They want to know if they can aggregate data over time. All of that can be shown to you in a live demo. A demo doesn't cost anything. You can also go there to get a quote about your specific circumstance, and maybe if you have an iMotion set up currently, how you can expand that and sort of what the cost of that is. You can actually learn more about each module. So if you're interested in learning more specifically about webcam eye tracking, webcam respiration, you can find those white papers, and you can also see sort of validation studies that have been done internally. You can also find publications. So if you want to see iMotions users that have published using these tools, you can also find that on our website. Recently, the marketing team has put together an RDC Pocket Guide. So feel free, that's a free download. Go and check that out. And it also breaks down the different modalities, talks about some use cases. It is a really nice resource, especially if you want to communicate to others about what you learned today in this webinar. Again, this webinar link will be available to you after the webinar. I think it comes out, is it tomorrow? Tomorrow, correct. Last thing, please remember, if you haven't already, to sign up for our newsletter and follow us on LinkedIn. Thank you for joining today, and have a great rest of the day.